Coca, Sunarai, Sunarayenti. 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 Coca, Sunarai, Sunarayenti.
Hello, hi, welcome back to this new episode of the Mango TV podcast. Today is one of my special format, which is the Psychedelic Confessions. We have back to the podcast Jerónimo M.M, dear friend and in first mentor in this world of plant medicine. He produced a documentary called The Jungle Prescription 15 years ago when all the experts were very young and with black hair. I'm not going to read your bio. Recently, I got a bit bored about reading people's bio, so I'm asking, can you introduce yourself in 2 minutes?
Yes. Hello. Thank you for having me, Giancarlo. Glad to be here. My name is Jerónimo M.M, and I am a Social Innovation Director of the ICEERS Foundation. Social means groups of people, and innovation means new things. So my job revolves around getting groups of people to do new things. In this case, the focus of my work, it's the integration of plant medicines and plant medicine practices into Western societies. Now, obviously, these practices are not new. They're very, very old, but they're new for us. And this is where the innovation part comes in. I'm particularly fascinated with the fact that when we look at the cultures of origin, these plants are very much revered, respected, and not only that, they have a very valuable space in the society. You know, I'm talking about tobacco, coca, ayahuasca, peyote, etc. But up to this point, or up to very, very recently, every time that these plants had arrived outside of the cultures of origin and they came to us, instead of becoming the same blessing that they were for the cultures of origin, they became quite of a curse for us. And you can see this with tobacco, with coca, with many things. So I'm fascinated by the fact that the same plants can be blessings in some societies and curses in others. And I'm trying to think about, as these plants arrive to our society, how we can make them more of a blessing and less of a curse. And if we, and I would like to, a lot of my work has to do with thinking of possible futures, or imagine possible futures in which these plants are not only integrated in our society so they can be practiced safely and legally, but also they become, you know, as beneficial for us as we can see they are in the cultures of origin.
Amazing. And for people that want to know more about what Jerónimo just described, there is the first episode with him where he goes a little bit more in depth about cultural appropriation and themes like that. And also he mentioned ICEERS. And we had Ben Delonen, which is the founder and manager of this foundation charity, to educate and facilitate the integration of this medicine in the West, that you can also check on the Mango TV podcast. But now we are here for confessions. So we want the raw personal experience around this medicine. You know, as I always say, there is a lot of information about psychedelic, but I feel there's not enough personal recollection. You know, how was it for you? How did it make you feel? How did it impact your life? How did you integrate this download to your life? And so we're going to go chronologically, substance by substance, like we've done for so many psychedelic confession. So we discussed a little bit already. So for you, the first mind-altering substance was LSD. First cannabis. So how was your encounter with cannabis? Was a love at first sight? Describe it in details, how it make you feel and everything.
I would start by saying that, you know, perhaps I wasn't the usual candidate for illegal drugs in our society. I was sort of a good boy. I got good grades. I've always been kind of a nerd, not much of a rebellious type, so, and generally sort of on the straight path. So I arrived to cannabis, I think, kind of late compared to other people I know.
How late? How old were you?
I was like 17 or 18. And and what it did was, which I think this happens to everybody, is the first thing it does is to realize that what you have been told by the news media and by by all of this, this, I'm talking about the 90s, I was living in the United States, just say no to drugs there, all of these things were very strong, very, very, very big part of it. And it was also in the midst of the crack epidemic. I was living in DC, which is, particularly sort of, and this was very, very present. So, there was this sort of mainstream narrative around how evil and dangerous these substances were and how toxic. And then, of course, when you try it yourself, the first thing you realize is you haven't been told the whole truth. It's not that these substances don't have their dangers. Of course they do. And they're powerful substances, and all powerful things have dangers, like a backhoe or like a fire or like a knife. But they can also be incredibly useful tools. So, the first thing that surprised me, also, like I said, from a very sort of, because I came from a very sort of, nerdish approach, was just how much I was learning. How much I was learning about things I didn't know. For example, music became, I suddenly found myself with this ability to sort of listen so intently to music and pick out the different instruments and realize what the structure of the song was and how things were built and what was happening next. And it seemed like I had never quite heard music like that before. And so things were opening there, And then I would say, the other thing that opened at the social level is that you sort of join this secret society suddenly of people that know. And this makes for all sorts of social opportunities, new friends, new conversations, new research. So that was the other thing that sort of it opened me to sort of, it's just you sort of walk through this secret door.
That just with cannabis.
Just with cannabis, yeah. Because then you join this sort of parallel world where, like, the people that are taking cannabis, they sort of hide to do it. They were hiding to do it, but then there's so many of them, and then they live sort of parallel lives where in front of so many people they act like this is not happening, and they're so all of these very normal, productive members of society actually had a parallel secret life, and that was very, for me, very engaging, very, 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 very interesting. So I became, fascinated with the topic. Like I've become in my life fascinated with many topics, and I've just sort of gone deeper and deeper into research and reading and all of these, and cannabis sort of opened that door.
It give you like a sense of belonging.
It just opened it was like a whole other, dimension of life and living and experiencing the world that I hadn't imagined existed. Suddenly was opened, and I became very, very interested in this.
So like a way to maybe being more empathic, to connect with people on a more heart to heart, seeing them on a different light as a human being, more vulnerable, more passion and empathy, but also an increase in creativity, you think?
Increase in creativity, of course, yes. With you get so engaged with any of these activities as you were working or doing or cooking or making music or anything. So it became
it increased the senses. But so what is the downfall? What is the cons of this medicine?
The downfall for me, I sort of realized, and this was, I became quite, a regular user, and this went on for 10 or 15 years.
Even in the morning?
No.
Only at the end of the day.
At the end, on the weekends and stuff. I mean, I didn't find it particularly. Obviously, first of all, it doesn't help with work unless your work is individual and creative. I think generally speaking, it's sort of it because it makes small things so interesting and powerful. It can be quite distracting. So it's very useful for certain types of things that require concentration. But if you have to, manage many things, and then again, different people. I had a friend who was studying engineering, and he would smoke a joint and study physics. This was beyond my understanding how he could do that, but some people also can.
Yeah. Also, sometimes for many people it creates a sense of you imagine outcomes that are not happening. as you know, I had a problem with cannabis, and I was smoking earlier and earlier during the day, and you go like in a wishful thinking approach, and in business you just project your enthusiasm that is not there. There is a little bit of a sense of
a booster, yeah. And this was my big sort of realization. Like I say, it came, I don't know, 10 or 15 years later. I remember I was in the back of a car, and some friends were driving, and we had smoked, and I was quite high, and I was lost in my mind in this reverie of things and thoughts, and suddenly I realized, I'm in this place and this is what I'm thinking about, but actually I'm sitting in the back of a car in sort of fetal, almost like fetal position, and this is what I'm actually am. I'm just a quiet person in the back of a car, lost in his own mind reveries. Like suddenly I was able to see myself from the outside. I will bring here the traditional cultures because they're always an inspiration for me, because they have a much longer relationship to these things, so they manage to sort of increase the benefits and lower the harms of these by default, because they had to live with these substances and survive with them. In Morocco, where smoking hash and hashish came later, but especially cannabis, kiff is very, very old tradition. There is a sort of social norm that it's not considered okay for young and very young people to smoke cannabis. This is because they say it makes them distracted and it makes them lazy, and young people should work. And then as people get older, the sort of social permissivity about using cannabis gets higher and higher and higher. And then when you're an old man, you can smoke all the cannabis you want. And nobody, and that's because when you're an old man in Morocco, very often you're sitting outside your house, staring into the street, and that's what you do most of the day. And of course, for this, cannabis is perfect. Cannabis is perfect. So there is, again, powerful substances require an adequate context, a wrapper, an envelope that will actually, put them in a place where they become useful to the society instead of, and when you look at the traditional cultures that have a relationship with this, you always find that this sort of knowledge, this wisdom, these best practices are already there. So that's what I would say about cannabis. The people that have been using it the longest, they really appreciate it, but they understand that there's better times and better places and better circumstances to do it than others. In India, where hash is, very, very popular, or has a very long history, it is used as a meditation tool, and this is also very sadhus and people who basically their entire lives have to do with engaging and relating to your inner world and to your thoughts, and you need to be in a state of presence, and you're practicing this thing. Then in these circumstances, also it becomes very, very useful. But it could be that if you're in the moment where you're running a business and you're talking to 50 people all the time, perhaps coffee.
It's better.
It's a more indicated helper for those circumstances. So when one thinks of these plants and substances as not as drugs but as helpers, then you understand that there's certain places where they help best and certain places where they don't help at all, and then you can begin to make informed decisions and to really get the benefits and minimize the harms.
Yeah. But so I remember once you told me that your father said that there's two types of smokers: those that can't stop and those that can't continue.
Yeah.
When did you decide that you could continue? You could not continue.
It was very. I don't remember the exact date. I don't feel that I quit cannabis. I feel cannabis quit me.
I understand.
So in that sense, it was very, very easy. It was not a conscious decision. It was not a matter of will. It was very, very easy. It was the same experience. The experience hadn't changed at all, but I found that I stopped enjoying it. Perhaps because I'd overdone it, and it had been in too many places, in too many circumstances.
Yeah.
So somebody also told me that a person starts smoking cannabis because it makes everything a little bit different, a little bit more interesting. And the same person stops smoking cannabis for the exact same reason.
Yeah, that's well said. Graham Hancock says that every plant has a spirit and a spirit has a personality. So the ayahuasca is the grandmother who's like loving grandmother, and iboga is the stern grandfather, and the peyote whatever the funny uncle. But cannabis is the trickster, and it is a jealous trickster. So it gives you the illusion that it helps reducing the anxiety, but sometimes the anxiety is caused by the withdrawal. So it tricks you in believing that you need it. And then it's jealous in the way that it's very seductive and it's very easy to abuse. I know many people, I wouldn't say most of them, that they think they're using, but really they are abusing. And then they will say things like, "Oh, but I can stop anytime." Okay, great. When was the last time you stopped? 30 years ago. So anyway, that was very well said. Thank you very much. So the second compound we're going to discuss is LSD. How was your encounter with LSD?
I mean, we have a long history going all the way to the 50s and 60s. That LSD is there is before and after in most people's lives. Out of this, that's what it made this tremendous cultural revolution in the 60s. It's a substance that will definitely
change your understanding.
It will change your understanding of things, of yourself, and on reality. Now,
and for you personally?
For me, it was like one step higher on this same thing. Like I said, I was never. I don't have a very like addictive or like sort of, this sort of personality that always wants more. With alcohol and with whatever. But I'm very interested in learning. So with the thing with LSD is that I always felt after an LSD night that in the morning I had learned something very, very important that I couldn't have learned any other way. And this, because I'm a nerd, became fascinating for me. I tried to, I kept going back to it. And it was also the beginning of my interest in the history of these compounds. And I began to read more about the history of drugs and the history of plants and what happened with LSD and all the and shamanism, the origins, all of this. It was the beginning of a wormhole, sort of a research wormhole, which is my nature to sort of pick a topic and just go into it. And LSD definitely provoked this tremendous interest in this, and at the same time, I could tell that some nights were better than others, and some nights were kind of stupid. And some nights I felt like it just been a waste of time sometimes, and that there was actually, it wasn't just the substances and it wasn't just me, but it was a whole set of circumstances that would facilitate or not a process of learning or a process of personal growth. And this also was always very present in my quest.
But do you remember your first time?
Yes, I took it with my cousin in Amsterdam. And
How old were you?
I was like 19, I think, and
it was a big dose. Do you remember?
It was big enough, and we were trying to make it to Vondel Park, and we were going to spend the day there, and we never made it to Vondel Park. We stayed in a much smaller park on the way to Vondel Park. And we just sat in the grass. It was a beautiful sunny day, and we didn't move. We weren't capable of doing much other than just sitting there and staring at each other in disbelief, and just sort of,
But Stan Grof, that he was the first one that was sent a batch of LSD from Sandoz when they discovered it, who has been supervising thousands of LSD sessions, who's considered one of the godfather of LSD-assisted psychotherapy. He says that the real benefit starts, in high dose, when you have a ego death, when you have a psychological death. Have you ever had one of those?
No, not with LSD, but I would say, Stan Grof had a psychiatric hospital under his care. So he had 24-hour watch. He had doctors. He had padded rooms. So he had very, very different contexts where you could give people very, very high doses of LSD and they could do an ego loss, and you could just sort of bring them back and care for them. The way I was doing it, in parties, in the street of Amsterdam, a concert, in whatever, I think it would be a really bad idea to do it.
Totally.
And as I'm glad I never went that far, and I'm glad I didn't, in the sense that, because the context was not right.
Yeah.
And for people who have accidentally overdosed or taken really large doses of LSD in very public places with not the right support, it turns into an absolute nightmare.
Disaster, yeah.
An absolute nightmare.
Have you heard about this professor of theology from Middle America called Christopher Bash? He wrote this. It took for 20 years high dose LSD, like 2-3 times a year. And then he wrote this book, which I don't remember. We'll put it in the show notes. And he had he says that once you take high dose LSD and you go on the other side, when you do it again and again so regularly, you basically are accepted. You become a resident of this realm. And so he has been. I didn't read the book, but I assisted to a talk by him where he said that he was really, connecting with the future of humankind, and he saw the future of the superhuman, he calls it, and it was very touchy. And I always been tempted to do the 300, 400 microgram and see and go on the other side, because that's what all the intellectual and writer and philosopher from Aldous Huxley and that they talk about, they talk about the the door of perception and the other side, but I always chickened out. Are you curious to do high dose in a controlled environment?
The thing is, this for me is the shamanic path.
Mm-hmm.
That's that space. In my understanding, that he's talking about. This is similar to shamans would tell the same story. There's a reason why in indigenous societies there's only 1 or 2 shamans, because that path, going to that place and then being able to come back and
it's
integrate,
not for everybody.
It requires a level of discipline and a level of sort of
training.
Training, yeah. It's like running a marathon, right? You have to be in shape in order to be able to run a marathon and get healthier by doing this. If you're not in proper shape, then you'll twist your ankle. The marathon will not. So later in life, as I became closer to shamanic practices, and I did a lot of dietas and a lot of retreats, and I've a number of times I've gotten closer to sort of the edge of that sort of, I would call it, let's call it the shamanic realms, or you can call it the other worlds or whatever. And every time I made the conscious decision that I didn't want to go there, because that's not what I came looking for in these plants. I came looking for self-knowledge, self-healing. I came looking for keys to this reality. I'm not that curious about the astral worlds. I've been with a lot of people and spoken to a lot of people through the years that delve in those worlds. They're not making stuff up. The experience they describe are real. There's no doubt in my mind. But again, for myself, I think the useful question is why. What is your purpose? What is your objective? Why are you going there? What are you trying to get out? Because it's like, if you make a metaphor of another environment, like say whatever, the North Pole or the jungle. Of course you can visit the North Pole and you can visit the jungle, but why? Are you there just to watch? Are you trying to learn something? Because these are environments that have very sort of rigid laws about what you can do and what you cannot do. The dangers are very real, the jungle can be a very welcoming place if you know how to survive there, or it can kill you very, very quickly if you don't know what you're doing. And the same goes for the North Pole, and the same goes for these places. In my understanding, the sort of that other place, the sort of the shamanic realms, it comes with its own rules, and it comes with its own, yeah. And I don't know this. I don't know those rules. So why would I? Why would the curiosity is not enough. My curiosity and the conversations and the stories I've heard from other people are enough for me to sort of think, okay, I get that, I'm not going there.
I see. This is so interesting because this is a very current topic for me. What I call the other side, can be a different realm, like the North Pole or the jungle with their own set of rules and danger, but can also be a mystical experience. It can also be an experience of divinity. But then at this point, I feel that why would you go and have a connection with divinity, with source, with some sort of cosmic design? I think because it would enrich you, and it would complete you, and it would maybe even help you with your healing. I mean, having a metaphysical experience, which is the experiential understanding of a grand design, of mind at large.
The spirit, yes.
The spirit. But so I find it, if anything else, extremely beautiful, reassuring. I did, as you know, the last 10, 15 years, a lot of psychedelic experience, but I had maybe two mystical experience. One with the 5-MeO DMT, where I went to heaven, and it was a little bit fleeting, but that sense of unbounded compassion and love, and for the first time, I think in my life, I felt really whole. I felt really accepted. A little bit what you were saying about cannabis and your peer, a similar sense of belonging that is extremely therapeutical. And then again, recently with the 3 hours holotropic breath work, I went through the portal and I was on the other side with spirit, with this. It's like a force. It's like an energy which is associated with a sense of awe and gratitude and respect and honor and belonging, and it just gave me such a power in continue to help others. It gives a sense of purpose and meaning. It's funny because people think that I'm such a big expert on psychedelic. They invite me to podcasts, but I just starting to explore I don't know high dose, but I'm just starting to understand the ego death, the metaphysics, what does a metaphysical experience really means.
Yes, I mean, I think that's what we're all looking for. When I spoke about shamanic realms, I meant and other dimensions when one encounters other beings that seem to have their own agency, that have conversations with you or offer you things, and this is what I meant about the shamanic. I think what you describe is still at the edge of the personal realization. It's a friend of mine, someone I learn a lot from, said the thing is, in that other world there's very useful stuff for your life. Now the art of this is how you bring that is in the other world into your everyday life, because that's the objective. You go every once in a while when you need this and you reach to that, and then you bring this to enrich your everyday life, because we are incarnated bodies in a material world that is very, very stubborn. It doesn't. There's this sort of consensual reality is quite stubborn. It doesn't go. It doesn't go away. Yeah. And what can you do that will help you with this, stubborn part of reality? It turns on itself when the idea is, oh, I found such wonderful things there, I have to be there all the time. Then you're inversing the actual order.
Yeah, then it becomes spiritual materialism.
And then it just becomes an endless quest to be in that place, and then of course then your material. So of course, on these experiences are very real, very powerful. But there's two things that I think there's sort of a focus in our culture, also in my own process on these experiences, and I was missing big chunks of something that is again very, very stark, very black and white in traditional cultures, which is like, one, what are you going to do with this
information?
What are you going to do with these informations? What are they going to turn into? And second, and I think this is the hardest part for us, is that transformative experiences, they're not so hard. With certain drugs, certain substances, you can do it. Even with certain fasts, with certain retreats, you can make somebody have a very powerful experience. However, and this is, for example, in indigenous cultures, initiation rituals. They will take kids into the woods and they will go through some terrible ordeal, and in this experience that they have, they have to reach for their own strength, their own resources, and they return a different person by this experience. But they don't stay a different person because they had the experience. They stay a different person because everybody in the community recognizes the experience that they have had, and they change their relationship to them. And this is the part that we are missing in our culture. If you don't have a community that is witness and that acknowledges the fact that you're having these powerful experiences and that you're now different, if your life outside of the experience you had pretty much remains the same because you're not making any changes and because the society around you are not recognizing the changes in you, then 60 or 70% of the power of these experiences is lost. It just sort of slides back into normality.
Yes.
And this is the part where we are, I think, very new at this.
Yeah.
And making mistakes and focusing on things that are not necessarily the most important.
Yeah. But so let's leave that for the ayahuasca section because I will still try to keep a little bit the psychedelic confession format. So we spoke about LSD. Did you give goodbye to LSD like with cannabis, or it's something that you revisit once in a while?
Yeah, once in a while. I'm still, I find it, and it always made. I have an injury on my back, and it always made it hurt, and I find that always returns. So it's I'm not. It's an amazing compound, but really, what happened to me was that when I entered, I began to visit indigenous communities and see that everything changed for me. But before that, what followed the LSD was, the 90s electronic music and MDMA.
MDMA. That was a good segue. Okay, let's talk about MDMA.
What can you say about MDMA? I mean, it's I only recently learned that the way MDMA works is not by making you love everything and everybody and yourself, which is what it felt like, but actually it works by taking away fear. And when fear is gone, then love follows. So for me, the encounter with MDMA and I was, going to clubs and electronic music, and I was living in Amsterdam, was very much a ball of love. Suddenly I met this group of people and we were going out and we were taking MDMA and we were just, hugging each other and non-stop. We were just like a ball, we just sort of ended up just a puddle of people in a couch. You couldn't, you wanted to be as close to everybody as you could. And it felt so good. And we were all so nice to each other and so happy being nice to each other. And the music was so good. And it was just, so when that was a very, very beautiful, very healing place for me in ways that I didn't realize at the time, perhaps because I'm so intellectual. But I remember when I first came back from the Netherlands, a very old friend of mine said, "You now like yourself." And I thought, well, I had never been aware that I didn't like myself. But I trust, this is a very old friend who knows me very well, and I trust, I very much trusted her opinion. This, in a big sort of summary, I would say was the effect that MDMA had not just on me, but on many of us. It was healing from that aspect. People have always said, are also saying now, MDMA is being used to treat post-traumatic stress disorder. It's possible that many of us were self-medicating for this. Now, the part that I was sad, or that made me a little bit sad, is that at the end I found myself in a very repetitive place where we just go to the clubs and take these things and then dance and say hi to people, and all we were doing is we were locking each other in dark rooms, in dark basements, listening to repetitive music and sort of bumping from each other. Again, I had this experience of, what does this look like from the outside?
Like the cannabis.
Yeah, and what does it look like from the outside? Is a bunch of players in a dark room. They can't really talk because the music is so loud, and they're smiling a lot and feeling good, but they're sort of bumping in each other. And also, there are different stages of their experience because people were taking the pills at different times. So there's never sort of, there's some moments of collective, but in general it's sort of disaggregated. And I thought a lot about, how the early days of MDMA, people thought that this would be an amazing tool for for couples therapy, for people who had communication problems and all this, and it absolutely is. And yet, it seemed like this part was being lost, the part of the physical contact or the getting a massage and all the wonderful things you can do at MDMA. Instead, was reduced to let's go to a club and which is again nothing wrong with this, but I thought there's in the Pacific Islands there's kava kava, which is it's a sort of a slight calming, it has a calming effect. It's not very big, but it's that you definitely feel it. And when people are having problems and there's arguments and there's problems in the community, the two people that are arguing will be made to drink kava together, and then with a third person there try to work their problems out. And I thought, how come this is not more present with MDMA? We have this amazing tool here for when people argue, and this happens in interpersonal relationships all the time. It would be so easy to say, hey, let's meet at my place, let's both take MDMA and see if we can talk about it again.
But people do. I mean, in Dallas, it was legal. Couple therapists would use it. They would say, don't get married under the influence. Yes. And then, there is a lot of underground couple weekend where... they receive couples, and then there is actually a questionnaire before, during, and after. And with my wife, actually, we did it like almost once a year. Now we haven't done for a while because I feel things that we have less issue now. We know each other better. But back then, it would be like a major reset, because you would see the whatever discussion, whatever difference we would have. I personally, my experience was that I would see it from her point of view, and it really increased empathy and bonding. So I was wondering, when you were like taking MDMA with your friends and you were saying you were getting so close and loving each other, but then this increased feeling would not translate after, when you guys were sober with that same pack of dog you spent all night hugging, then the relationship was improved after, or it was back to base?
Well, I mean, this is the thing, right? This is the reason why there was these T-shirts that said "Don't get married until 6 weeks after ecstasy." In the early 80s, in the college campuses, when ecstasy was still legal. And this is the thing. And people, somebody told me recently, no, I mean, I don't like to take ecstasy because when I take ecstasy, I always end up falling in love with whatever girl I'm talking to. And I said, but this is not a problem of ecstasy. This is a problem of what company are you choosing for this very special experience. Right? This is what wrapper are you doing? So now you have a substance that will make you get incredibly close, and you can have an experience of, real intimacy, If you do it with your wife, you will have something that, or someone you're very close to, then it will take it to the next level of possibility. But if you do it with a total stranger, you will get the intimacy, but then the next day you will regret it and think that it was all just the effects of the drugs. So you want to, and that's what you want to avoid, or I try to avoid. I try to avoid situations in which the experience will be diminished.
Yeah. So you have to do it with people who you want to increase the relationship. It can be a friend, it can be,
So there is a better and worse times and places and ways to do these things.
Yeah.
And this is the part that I'm constantly sort of fascinated with.
Yeah. I see a consistency in your approach. Also to be mentioned that MDMA, I don't know exactly the functioning in the brain, but it managed to separate the memory from the emotion attached to the memory. So for PTSD, people that come from the war, they're now able to relieve the traumatic event, be able to process it somatically without the strong emotion,
without the fear.
Without the fear. That's what you're saying.
Without the
it's
fear.
A fear blocker. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's they call it the Tuesday blues, right? The down in serotonin started to make it not worthy. It was just becoming harder and harder the 2 days after. But Rick Doblin once told me, listen, it gets only bad if you want to cope. If you take this 2 days after, just no phone, no email, you don't have to cope with anything, just walk in the forest and long bath and listen to music, then you don't have the down. And it actually is true. I tried once and it's true.
I was surprised, for example, that they were thinking of giving MDMA in hospice care, so to people who had like terminal cancer and stuff. And I talked to the scientists and I said, look, I think this is kind of strong physically in the body to give to somebody who's very old or very weak, like when they have like a terrible crash 3 days later. And he said, look, I'm convinced, 80 to 90% of the crash has to do with the fact that people don't sleep, that they're mixing it with alcohol, smoking, blah, 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 blah. And that the substance is not very pure, pharmaceutical. And this is and that they try to get on with their lives. That actually in those contexts, in sort of a hospital context with a person with a pure substance, and you do it during the day, so the person sleeps at night, and you don't break the sleep cycle and stuff. He said this thing about the Tuesday blues doesn't even figure.
Yeah. Interesting. Is becoming now. I think they're doing stage 3 trial in America, and they expect to be able to prescribe it legally as a medicine together with the psychotherapy.
It's unstoppable.
The legalization of MDMA?
The eventual integration of these substances into our societies, because they're simply too useful.
They're simply too useful.
Yeah. Then nobody's gonna go back. Nobody. At least not the people that know. You could ramp up the war on drugs all you wanted. You could make the penalties so much worse. People would still be doing this because
it's not gonna go away. It's gonna go underground.
It's too useful and too important in their lives.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the big one. That's the love of your life. So tell us about the relationship with ayahuasca. How did it start? How is it evolving?
Yeah, so basically, this the MDMA and the clubs and the electronic music, and this was the 90s, and that took a good 10 years of my life. And at the end, it was getting repetitive, and it was getting boring, and it was always the same. And I began to see myself from the outside, and it didn't feel like I was learning so much, and all of these things. And then I was collaborating. I kept researching, and I met Mark Elam, with whom I made the documentary. And the ayahuasca documentary, and he had been working on a documentary. He's a filmmaker about traditional plant use. He'd been in Mexico, so when we met, we talked for hours. We took mushrooms. We went rollerblading. We got along very, very well. And at this point, I was taking a year off from work. I was taking a sabbatical, and I said, "Listen, I'm taking a year off. Let's go back and do it. I will. I'm very interested in this." So,
which year are we now?
This is
más o menos
1999, I believe.
Yeah.
1999. And then, so like 6 months later, we were in Mexico. He had already recorded with the Huichols and with Maria Sabina with mushrooms, and the idea he had at this point was to make one film per plant.
Already back then, eh?
Yeah. And at this point, we went to look for Salvia divinorum and what was left of traditional use of Salvia divinorum in Oaxaca. We didn't find very much at that point. The type of work that we were doing looked very much like archaeology. You were looking for the last remnants of cultures and practices that you could see were much bigger before, but that now were reduced to very far away, very remote communities in South America or in Mexico where it still survived. We didn't find much, and it was not mushroom season. We were in the Oaxaca mountains, but instead, what we ended up having a session with a local curandero, a shaman, and what he gave us was ololuiki seeds, which are the sort of morning glory seeds. That's the morning glory seeds have a substance that is a precursor to LSD. It's called LSA. Actually, it's not the seeds that have it, but a fungus that grows on the seeds that is related to ergot. That's why it's there. But that was my first experience in a sort of traditional shamanic, South American context. So, we took these plants, and first of all, I would say about the effects. The effects were not very big compared to other things that I had taken. I wouldn't say it was a very strong psychedelic experience. There was a lot of body load. I was feeling very bad and sick and stuff. And also, my stomach, my back began hurting like hell, the injury. It was also high in the mountains during the night. It's humid, it's cold. We were sitting in not very comfortable, chairs, etc. But we were sitting in front of the altar, and it was just the three of us. And the indigenous man, Don Eligio, begins to go in this sort of trance, and he's talking, and then he's singing, and then he would stop, and he would look at me and say, "Now is your turn, Jerónimo. What do you want to ask God?" Why are you here, and what do you want? What do you want to ask God for? And then he will go quiet. And at this point, people who are tripping who know tripping will understand this. I went into the mind loop. I'm like, what does it mean? Like, what do I have to ask? And why am I here? And who is God? And do I even believe in God? And why would I ask God if I believe in God? And when was the last time that I had God for it? And this turned into this and I just went, I couldn't answer. I was just and he would just go back to his thing, and then again, he would ask me, and then again, I would go into this total. So this was already pushing me in a direction where I had never gone with these substances, to wonder about, so many things. And at the same time, my back was hurting more and more and more and more. And it got to a point where I was literally seeing like this animal with very sharp fangs biting in my spine, like, wow. just driving this. It felt like that. And there was a point where it just hurt so bad. It hurt so bad as the night progressed that suddenly I knew what I wanted to ask God for. And then I raised my voice and I said, "Ayuda," which is help in Spanish. And then suddenly this man and his son who was there just mobilized themselves, and they took me to this cot, and they laid me down, and they started like pressing and squeezing in different parts of my body, and they wrapped me with this mix of lime and tobacco, which has just set my whole body on fire. And so everything got really, really confusing. I was suddenly very, very far away from my home, in a very, very strange place, in a very, very strange situation. And these two people were doing things to me that I couldn't even, begin to understand. But in the middle of this, absolute madness, I had this thought that was like, okay, I don't know what the hell is going on. I really don't. But it looks like they do. They are doing things. It looks like they know exactly what they're doing. So I'm just gonna put myself in their hands.
Nice.
I'm just gonna, I'm just gonna trust that these people know what they're doing, because I for sure don't know what to do now. And that was the beginning of a sort of a very long, lifelong fascination with exactly this, what they seem to know that they're doing, that we don't know what's going on. This thing, and it was a before and after, because as fascinated as I've been with these substances, and as much as I've been able to have moments where I contact their potential, I've never been in an environment where actually all the incredible power of these substances was sort of driven, funneled into the idea of healing. This was not, had been in parties, it had been about fun, or about listening to music, or about talking to friends, or about fixing, having deep conversations, blah, blah, blah. But I'd never been in circumstances where the issue, the intention was directed towards healing and the knowledge too. And this really, I remember I woke up the next morning, and then, when I realized all this, I felt very, very white and very, very stupid. And I remember the interview we recorded with the man before, and all the stupid questions that I had asked for this documentary, and just how I was trying to poke at something, that I couldn't even begin to understand, that I had no clue. I was so embarrassed at the way we had shown up there with our cameras, and the way I just sort of engaged these people as they were sort of humbly trying to explain to me something that I couldn't even begin to see, and when all of these pieces sort of clicked together, I would say that was sort of there was a beginning, and there was a before and after in my life after that night. And it was the beginning of a very long relationship and a very long process, first trying to see and experience and understand just what is it that traditional cultures know about these things, and then trying to see through my work with the ICOS Foundation just what parts of it can we learn from and be useful for us, without going into this terrible place of taking things that are not ours, or trying to copy cultures and practices that are culturally and territory based.
But so this shaman and this morning glory, what's the active component, and which tradition are there?
this is the Mazatec. This is the Mazatec tradition. It's very rich. They have more plants other than mushrooms. Mushrooms are seasonal. They're not all year. So they also work with salvia. They also work with. They showed me. They also work with morning glory seeds. They showed me several different plants that they also work with that are not, not as powerful as mushrooms. But again, like I said, the power was not in the substance that I took, but in the context and the wrapper and the intention of what was being done there.
Yeah. And so you were fascinated about understanding what they were doing. But do you remember the effect on you? Did they heal your backache?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I got better. I threw up. I mean, all sorts,
Amazing.
all sorts of things happened that night. And when I woke up the next morning, I felt so absolutely wonderful. In this afterglow of just having touched something so human, right? And this is the other thing about it, that everything that I had witnessed and I had experienced, far from seeming, some sort of strange, strange traditions and superstitions of primitive people, engage with, with psychoactive substances. In fact, where the opposite, it was a highly developed science or art, or a strange mixture of both, some sort of empirical art around how one work with the strongest plants in nature and the deepest parts in people, and how you could combine these things and make it create a
relationship
and a container and a vehicle to make this not be just an interesting night or a great party, but actually something truly transformative.
Yeah. And so that started your love affair with these practices. And when was the first ayahuasca ceremony?
So we were in Mexico for 3 months. The way we would do it, and it was a lot of fun. I would recommend anybody does the same if you have the time, and that you say that you're making a documentary, and that
to have access.
about any topic that you find interesting, and that you take long tickets, and that you just have the first contact, which is what we did. Usually we knew who we had 3 months, and we knew who the first person that we were going to talk was. And then we would go and interview that person, and we would ask, who else should we talk to? And they said, you should see whomever. And we would take a bus and go to see that person, and then that person would get you in touch with another person, and then another person. And at the end of 3 months, this incredible trip had configured itself, where you just talked to so many interesting people and had experiences. And So first was Mexico, and then we got together again 3 years later. It was 2003.
So no ayahuasca on the first 3 months?
No, that was Mexico. Yeah. That was Mexico, and it was the Ololuiki. And then, we said, okay, what should we do next? And Mark said, I think we should do ayahuasca. He had tried ayahuasca. At this point, I hadn't. And there was very, very little online about it. It was mostly about the Santo Daime. There was very, very little information.
2002, 2003 now.
2002, 2003. So we went to Brazil, and first we went to Luis Eduardo Luna's Ayahuasca. He invited us. That was the first contact. So that was the contact that we had. So the first person that gave me ayahuasca was Luis Luna. Thank you, Luis. Look what you started. Look what you set in motion. And in my first ayahuasca experience, two very sort of words just sort of popped in my head in the midst of of the effects as I began to very, very strongly feel the effects. One was the concept of mother, which I must say hasn't come back. Just this word popped out in my head, mother, like this is a mother. And then the other one was path, and I even saw like a path going into some woods, and that was the beginning of and it was basically love at first sight, I would say. That was the beginning of a 20-year-old relationship with ayahuasca. Very, very, and we've gone through all the stages of a relationship. We've had the romance, then we've had the disappointment, then we have the return, then we had the working with from different. It's a very long and very deep relationship. It's still surprising me. So the thing that blew my mind about that trip in Brazil was that while what we were doing in Mexico looked like archaeology. We're trying to find something that looked like it was on its way to disappear. Ayahuasca in Brazil was the farthest thing from it. It was a booming, thriving culture. Thousands of people, the União de Vegetal, the Church União de Vegetal has 20,000 members. The Santo Daime temple was full. This was not at all, something that was in danger of disappearing. Quite the opposite. This was very alive, thriving, and expanding. So, we started with the churches. And we visited all 3 churches at Luis Luna. We made friends with Benny Shannon, who wrote an incredible book about ayahuasca, sadly kind of forgotten nowadays. I think it's a really, really important, beautiful book.
Do you remember the title?
Of course, The Antipodes of the Mind.
Yeah, we'll put it on the show notes.
Yeah, The Antipodes of the Mind, charting the phenomenology of the ayahuasca experience. And he's a Israeli academic, the sort of polymath, speaks 7 languages, but he was a professor of cognitive psychology who came to ayahuasca very late in life and who had no experience with drugs. And then he became fascinated, and after 13 years wrote this book that is really as an academic, is a solid academic piece and a love letter to this all at the same time. It's a really beautiful book. And where he attempts to do something that seems impossible, which is to make a map of everything that can possibly happen to you if you drink ayahuasca. That's what he called charting the phenomenology. And you say, okay, that's impossible. And then he goes and he does it in one book. It's really, really astounding piece. And also because it's full of like personal remembrances and stories that he heard from people. It's really, like I said, it's a love story.
But let's hear more about your personal experience. What was this? What was this word mother? How do you interpret that? Was a sense of being taken care of, being protected, being nurtured?
It's hard to tell, and it doesn't. I would say that the word that I absolutely can speak to or relate to, and maybe this mother will have to come back, or it's something that is working on, is path, and this was like that. I went on that path. I took that path. This was a path for me. And it's been a lifetime path. In terms of for your psychedelic confessions, in terms of I'm trying to think of because I've of course drunk ayahuasca hundreds of times, and so many things have happened. So I'm trying to think about, okay, can I pick 2 or 3 experiences
exactly
that were really, really significant, and I'm a little bit hesitant because the most significant experiences I had, the really 2 or 3 most significant experiences are also very sort of intimate. And I'm not so sure that this stuff is not that it shouldn't be talked about, but yeah. But I will get started and let's see where we get. Having said that, one of the most significant experiences I had came when I had already been on this path for 6 or 7 or maybe 10 years.
But just to ask you a little bit more color on the word path. I mean, do you had a sense of the destination?
No.
It was just an intuitive understanding that this medicine make me feel things, make me learn things about myself. It's definitely a path of self-improvement.
Okay. No, what happened was that my life changed around.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the path. So, when I arrived in ayahuasca, I found myself in this situation in my life where I'd basically, after very promising beginnings, I'd gotten stuck. So, I did very well. I'm at the university, good grades, blah, blah, blah. Got a good job, was making lots of money. I was a network engineer, traveling the world, and then I decided this is not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be, I had a good career had I wanted to be, a network engineer, but that's not what I wanted to do. So I took 2 years off with all the money I made. And theoretically in this year, I was going to figure out what is it that I really wanted to do. I went, I started with the documentaries, that's when we did these travels, and then I spent all the money, I went back to Madrid, and actually I didn't have a plan, I didn't have a clearer idea of what I wanted to do at all. I had an idea of what I didn't want to do. I sat down and I tried to write my CV again to try to get another job as a computer engineer, and I just couldn't do it. So I didn't do it. And then I fell in this sort of vortex, or a spiral, where I was partying a lot with a lot of very nice, very interesting people. My life wasn't going anywhere. Most of theirs wasn't either. That was also part of all the partying. And this just sort of, I'm taking shit jobs here and there because I was waiting for the real thing. And this wasn't it, and this wasn't it, and this wasn't it, whatever was it that the real thing was. And okay, this is nice and interesting, and it's classical in your early 20s to be confused and not know what you want to do. But this went on for like 6 years, and as it slipped into my 30s, and I had gone from promising young man to cause of family concern. And no attempts of pushing or cajoling me could get me to make a commitment or a decision or whatever it was. And I only had a clear idea of what I didn't want and no clear idea of what I wanted. This just got worse and worse, and I began to feel quite bad about everything. But I didn't know how to get out of it. I was sort of trapped. And at this point, there was the first trip with ayahuasca, and then on the second trip in Peru, I heard about the dietas. Now, the dietas is it's called dieta, is diet, it means diet, but it's basically some, traditional Amazonian, it's a big part of traditional Amazonian medicine. It's actually much more important than ayahuasca. That's also something that we don't see.
Traditional vegetalismo.
So in the dietas, it's a retreat. You spend, 1 week to 2 months, 3 months, 7 months. They can be very long. Basically in isolation, in a hut in the jungle, you're alone. Your diet is very restricted. You cannot eat any salt, any sugar, any spicy food. The list is very long. There's all sorts of restrictions, and you're taking plants that are given to you by this healer. So when I was there,
sometimes just one.
Sometimes just one, yeah.
That is picked by the shaman according to your resonance.
To your need, yeah. Exactly. So it's a big, and these plants are psychoactive, but in a very subtle way. They're not hallucinogens. They do have effects on your body and your mind, but it's not something that is very, very. However, in the context of the dieta, they become very, very useful. So when I was there, we were doing research. I was still recording interviews, and I met this Catalonian pharmacologist who was doing his thesis on dieta plants, which are many. And I went with him, and I met different people that he had been interviewing for his research. And I heard about this dieta, which is called the dieta de palos. And palos means sticks. And it's basically a diet where they basically cook together, 2 to 20 different trees, bushes, that's why they're called sticks. You just cut the whole branch and chop it in pieces and throw it in the pot, and you boil it, and you end up with this very thick sort of brown liquid. And this is what you drink during the dieta. Now, in those societies, they did the palos dieta when people were feeling weak, when they needed to get strong. And sometimes for things like, everybody there had to do 2 years of mandatory military service. And for them, it was very, very hard. These were people from the jungle. They were considered, there was racism in Peru, and it's the military, and it's 2 years. So they got, the treatment they receive is really rough. So before they go in these 2 years that are going to be very difficult, they do 1 month palo dieta to get strong and to get ready for this. And then when they return after 2 years, then they do another month palo dieta just to sort of clean up and get strong again. And when I heard about this, I thought, oh, this is exactly what I need. Because it was beginning to look that what I was doing was not staying free, but actually rejecting commitment. I would not commit to a job. I would not commit to a profession. I would not commit to a woman. I would not commit because I wanted to be free to, that wasn't clear what I wanted to be free for. And at the end, my freedom had become a sort of museum piece that I was keeping at all costs by not taking a job, by not taking this. But at the end,
it was maybe pathology.
But I wasn't doing much with it.
Yeah.
So I thought maybe this is what I need. I need a palos dieta to get strong and just come back and just be an adult. I'm 33. It's time to commit, get a job, get a woman, settle down, these things. And that's what I thought that was sort of my plan. And basically, that's exactly what happened. I won't go into the details. The dieta is very long. There's some diaries.
That
We can put the link.
Which tradition was that?
This was in the upper jungle. This is La Mista tradition, which are where
Quechua La Mista.
Quechua La Mista,
Yeah.
exactly. Where the dietas are very, very strong, and the palos. And ayahuasca is considered one more palo. They don't have this sort of, they don't put it in a pedestal at all. They consider it one more perch in a very large toolbox of plants. So what happened was that my life was changing in this path, and so that the path that I followed was, how can I continue to learn and use, these plants and be in relationship with these plants in order to, get out of all of these holes that I managed to get myself into, all of these things in my life where I'm stuck. So that went
work out?
It worked out fantastically. I did that dieta. When I came back, it was horrible. I spent 3 months in the jungle. When I came back, it was horrible. Everything was the same. I went into a deeper sort of crisis about nothing has changed and I'm still stuck. And then suddenly, 4 months later, everything began to change, and I found a job that I loved in a fantastic place. And, and 9 months later, I asked my girlfriend to get married, and then she got pregnant. And then 1 year later, I was married and with a kid and with a job that I really liked. And I was still, going deeper and deeper on my free time and on my vacations. I was returning to the jungle.
With the same tribe?
Same people, yeah, doing more dietas. And also I kept recording for the documentary, recording more interviews. I kept researching all of the anthropology, the history of all of this, which is absolutely fascinating, how the jungle got colonized, where these things came from, how these things moved from place to place, and even became went down all sorts of other wormholes, like why in the dieta no salt, what is it with salt, which groups know salt and not, what is the role of salt in society, which is absolutely fascinating. You cannot have an agricultural civilization without a source of salt. So salt is, as we understand, sort of urban civilization and salt go hand in hand. And this is why when indigenous people take you to the jungle, they take the salt away. Because there's something biochemical that is also happening there. But there's something about, it's a long story.
Yeah.
So my life changed.
Yeah.
And I went in this path and I was very committed. And then something like, 10 or 12 years into it, I was in the jungle drinking ayahuasca with this indigenous shaman. And then that night I had like a crisis of faith. So, I started feeling the effects and I started feeling sick. And then I thought, why am I doing this? Like, do I really actually enjoy this? Like, I'm feeling terrible right now.
The same feeling of looking from outside. Like
and my stomach is queasy, and and I'm just sort of like, and just this sort of, because ayahuasca is not, it's
not a walk in the park.
I think the main difference between ayahuasca and other psychedelics is that other psychedelics like mushrooms are very much working on the mind, on the mental. They don't have much of an effect on the body. But the ayahuasca, because it's the DMT plus the beta carbolines, the effects that it has on the body are just huge. So the body is being engaged, and that's what separates it from other psychedelics. And that's, for me, what makes it really powerful, because again, I had an issue of too much mind, and a plan that would, make sure that the body was present.
Totally.
Was very useful, very important for me.
Totally.
So I was feeling
because now we know, and Gabor Mate is a big proponent of this idea that the body keeps the score, the body knows, the somatic, the third millennium is maybe the millennium of the body, and how we have been separated from this the Newtonian Cartesian way of living. And so I never thought about that.
So I was feeling horrible, and then suddenly I found myself doubting, like, why do I drink ayahuasca? Like, do I like this? Like, it's often so difficult. Do I even like this? And then suddenly, like, the entire experience stopped, and I felt that that ayahuasca like took a step away from me and was sort of waiting for me to decide, well, do you like this or not?
Yeah.
And then I went to this, well, maybe I don't like this, like, and also, it's been a difficult night. I went into this cynical place, like suddenly the shaman seemed to me like just one more guy singing not so well.
Yeah.
And I thought that I had some visions that that later I found, but then I realized that it was all just my head trying to pull together threads and stories and narratives, and suddenly the whole thing just seemed like collapse. Like maybe this is the end. Maybe it's been a good 10 years with traditional Amazonian medicine, but today is the last day, and I'm gonna move on with my life.
Yeah.
And thank you very much, but I'm done with this. And this became, a real issue.
But why? Why? Maybe it was true. Maybe it was,
So as I was trying to think, about this, and I was even sort of, because sometimes with ayahuasca you can ask questions. So I was asking ayahuasca, like, is this it? Are we breaking up? Are we over? Is this over? And I was sitting down, and I saw myself like I was sitting down, and I was and in front of me there was this giant foot, and this foot led up to this gigantic woman, and this gigantic woman was poking me with a giant finger on my shoulder and saying, "Hey, this stuff that you're asking me, that's for you to decide. Don't ask me. Are we breaking up? That's for you to decide." So it was a terrible night, very, very difficult. And then
what did you decide?
In the morning, as the sun came up, I found myself, I had a wedding ring, and I was playing with it. And I often used to play with my wedding ring. And I was playing with this, and I suddenly found myself holding this ring and making a promise. And I promised that I was always going to protect these plants and the people and culture from where they originate. And this was something that came out of, my own going through the experience and coming out and the whole difficult night and realizing, no, absolutely, this is the process. I'm still in process. I'm still working with the plants. This is exactly, and not only that, I am fully committed to this.
I see. It was one of the typical things. We go deeper, or we're breaking up.
It was a leap of faith, or it was a crisis. Anyway, that was just something I did that night, and then I didn't think about it very much. Then 6 or 7 years later, I did a dieta, and then at the end of this dieta, there was an ayahuasca ceremony, the last ayahuasca ceremony. I came pretty tired. It'd been a long, hard dieta. I was not really, again, even in the mood to drink ayahuasca or to have a long night and all of this. And they served me the cup, and when I drank it, immediately, and sometimes this happens, immediately I knew that, every once in a while, you have, lesser ayahuasca experiences, and sometimes you have really strong ayahuasca experiences, and every once in a blue moon, you have a really, really strong ayahuasca experience. It's sort of magic. It's not tied to dose, really. It's not tied to, some, of course, more bigger cup usually is more, but not even. There's something strange about ayahuasca there. There's no mathematics to this. Every once in a while, you will have, just one hell of a night, and you don't know why. But you know soon. And I knew very soon, like, oh shit, that this is going to be one of those nights. And I was not up for it. I was trying to okay, let's relax like this, because when I have those nights, the physical experience is very, very strong, and I ended up just sort of twisted like a pretzel. It's very, very difficult, hyperventilating. My whole body goes numb and then goes to sleep. I mean, you lose. I'm very glad to be sitting in the dark in a room while somebody's taking care of me and nobody can see me, because this shit turns into, I don't know what to call it, the child of the exorcist. It gets quite intense. So it was beginning to happen, and all my sort of limbs were sort of contracting backwards, and I was beginning to get really, really rigid, and this terrible sort of beating pulse in my stomach, and my whole body was falling asleep, and I felt like I was about to faint. And I was thinking, okay, we know what this is, and then when this happens, it's like you can't resist, you can't hyperventilate, you can't go into fear, right? You just have to sort of just surrender, breathe slowly, don't freak out, and don't try to welcome it. You have to welcome all of these negative sort of effects, because otherwise you're going to hell. Yeah. So I'm very concentrated, just trying not to lose it, when suddenly I hear a voice, and the voice says, now pay attention, because this is very important. And then I saw the wedding ring, and the wedding ring had like a band. You know, sometimes in flags you see that there's like a sort of a lace that has words written in it.
Yeah.
It was like one of those things. It was like a lace with words written in it, and it was wrapped inside the ring, and it was hanging off the ring. It was the wedding ring with this sort of lace with words. And a voice said, "You made a promise that you were always going to defend these plants and the people and culture from whom they originate." And, you know, I had to think about it for a second. I was like, yes, I did. Do you now confirm this promise? And I had to think about it for a second as well. And I said, sure, yes. And suddenly I was back in my body. The room was completely back to normal. All my physical effects had disappeared.
Incredible.
And I just come back from, I don't even fucking know what to call it, this sort of Game of Thrones hallway of, you know, indigenous people would say the house of ayahuasca, probably. So, and everything had gone away, all of the physical effects. So it almost felt like in order to reach that place, you know, my body had to be, my physical body had to be twisted into this sort of, I don't know what to call it, vibrational shape, go figure what, where I could just access that place for, you know, 30 seconds, you know. And I came back and I thought, just, you know, 15, 16 years drinking, you know, for a 30-second audience.
But so this message, where did it come from? A part of you that was activated, or did it come from an independent sentient spirit?
Exactly.
What do you think?
This is the big question, right?
Nobody knows.
This is the big question. My answer is, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter
because it can be epistemological.
It doesn't matter if I went to the home of Yahé and I made a promise in front of ayahuasca herself, or if, because this was really important for me, my subconscious conversation with whatever, I was making this promise to myself and I was doing that, you know, in front of whatever I held most sacred, and it was presented to me symbolically. It really doesn't matter. What really and not only it doesn't matter, by trying to discern this, you would go crazy and miss the point.
Miss the point, because you need to basically act on the message.
Exactly. What are you going to do about it? What does this mean, and what are you going to do about it? Because it's meaningful regardless, whether it's spiritual or subconscious, it is still equally meaningful in a very personal way, right? So I would add one more sort of layer for people that know ayahuasca and know this, and is that somebody who I respect very much told me that no messages that come from, you know, this person would call it the spiritual world, ever come in the shape of an order or a command. So if you feel that ayahuasca is telling you something, then most likely that's you having a conversation with your ego. However, if you find yourself in a very strange place and an option is presented before you, that's the realm of the spirit. So for me, this is also very important, that, you know, the first promise, I made it out of my own free will. This is something I did because I wanted to at the end of a long night. And then 7 years later, what I had was an option, not a command, not, hey, I have a mission for you, hey, you have to, no. Do you confirm or not? Because you can. So I was even it was actually a second chance. It's like, do you want to back out on this promise? Or do you want to confirm it? So, you know, I think we're getting to the end. I will close up.
Yeah, but
with a summary.
Before you summarize, I just wanted to go a little bit deeper on this concept of it doesn't matter, you know, you said ultimately, it doesn't matter if you believe that that's the spiritual realm or is your higher self. It's not that it doesn't matter. It's not the most important question. It's not the most important question. Yeah. But let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. Okay, you're clearly aware about the debate in physics about, you know, mind and matter. No, is it the brain that creates consciousness, or is a pre-existing consciousness that can be cosmic that created the humans and the brain? Which one you think it is?
The thing is, I don't see that
You're not interested?
No. I'm very for me. For me, the interesting question with these plants is this, and this experience is not what are they, but what are you going to do with
But
it?
intellectually, the origin of consciousness doesn't interested you so much.
I even have problems with the whole. I'm not even sure when this whole consciousness debate already loses me.
I see.
So I'm very mental but very practical.
But do you consider yourself a spiritual person?
Yes.
Do you think there is life after death?
I don't know, but I can't wait to find out.
Do you think spiritual do you think a spiritual practice helps with healing?
Only if done correctly.
But okay, can you elaborate on that?
Because it's like all tools, like the plants, like fire, like the knife, like everything else. There's a way where it can open doors and increase, and there's a way where it can just be a distraction, a bypass, and a loop, or even just a sort of loophole, or escape from deep childhood, whatever traumas that lead you to all of that is playing at the same time. We're caught in this dimension.
But when you say you consider yourself a spiritual person, that means that you believe on a design, on a cosmic design. I mean, what does it mean for you to be spiritual?
Once I got in this terrible fight in the jungle with a seminary student that I met. He was studying to be a Catholic priest, and I tried to explain to him that I had reached the conclusion that the truth was not A or not A, that the truth was A and not A are truth at the same time, so that God was real and God was just a projection of human imagination,
and it doesn't matter.
And both things are true at the same time, and he was real and he was nothing but a projection, and that the spirits that the shamans talk about, they are true, absolute, and at the same time they're nothing but figments of our subconscious, blah 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 blah. And this drove the priest absolutely crazy.
Which cultural background is producing this belief of what you just described? Of is it God is true and at the same time not true? It's like Ramana Maharshi non-dualism.
I have no idea. I don't know how I arrived to this, but this seems to me to be like the integrating truth. And this is also why I avoid these discussions, because they're absolutely true, both of them. I mean, there's a very interesting sort of reading of all of the experiences with plants from a purely psychological reading, and what they're saying is true. And then there is a sort of a spiritual, astral, energetic reading of it, and it's also true. And both things are true at the same time. So what I try to do in my own process, because at the end that's all that matters. It's not that I convince anybody, or that is how am I going to live? How am I going to live? It's that I go back to that question instead of getting stuck in, but is it this or is it that? Well, whatever it is, I still have to choose.
Yeah. Okay. What I'm trying to ask you here is, you said that, the ultimate truth can be A and B at the same time.
A and not A.
A and not A at the same time. But then when I ask you, are you a spiritual person? You say yes.
Yes.
But so what does it mean?
I also know. What does it mean?
Since it doesn't mean belief in the existence of spirit.
I believe in spirit, and I also believe part of what we call spirit is completely just sort of projections of the human
mind. But already
mind.
You put part. Yeah. So there is a spirit bigger than us.
Yes, I know.
Okay. But so that acknowledgement is what I think is useful for leading your life. Because then ultimately you feel closer to your fellow human being. Ultimately you feel closer to the biosphere, to the ecosystem. You feel you have purpose. I think it helps to live a meaningful life, being aware that, I would say, consciousness came before matter. You would say an understanding of spirit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's really important for me, much more than consciousness, because I have problems grappling with this, is meaning. Meaning as a concept is incredibly important for me. The crisis that I was having, where I couldn't choose a job and I couldn't, had everything to do with meaning. This for me is absolutely, it is the skeleton that holds life, is meaning, right? And I intuit that there's an order and of meaning
bigger than us,
and this is what I call God. But because my intuition is so poor, and I'm only literally just sort of grappling at the edges, of it, I try not to think about it so much, but to ask myself the question: how do I align with this? How do I get myself aligned with this order that starts in the physical, and then goes to other levels?
And how do you do that?
Drinking plants, talking to people, and also in
respecting your vow with the plant, helping with ICEs.
I mean I didn't close, but this was before I became a full-time employee of ICEs, and now very much the promise that I made has turned into quite a big job that I tirelessly work at through my work in the ICES Foundation.
Very nice. That was very interesting. We still have a couple of substances that maybe we can touch quickly. I'll just mention all the three of them: San Pedro, tobacco, and coca leaves. Do you have any personal, memorable experience you want to share?
I mean, most memorable, I would love to tell a coca story.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough towards the end of the documentary project. The wonderful thing about making documentaries I worked in for was the access that they give you and the places that you can go. And then on this last project, this was for me the real sort of coming of age trip in the Amazon, because this time I really went to one of very far remote indigenous community very traditional, that you couldn't reach except by a small airplane, and that you would never be able to visit if you didn't have the proper permits and the proper access.
What's the name of the tribe?
It is in the river Piraparaná. They were Barasana people, so this is the big Tucano complex. I can talk about this for hours, but it's the Vaupés, it's the Colombian, it's the Colombian Vaupés. But over there, we were staying at the big Maloca, which is astoundingly large, and it's the Malocas that you see in the Regel Dolmatov books and the pictures from the 40s and the 60s. And every night the men gather to, after work, they gather to do mambe, which is the coca powder which they prepare. And this is we were all sitting in the dark of this, just a small flame, very, very large maloca. And then first they would bring the baskets of coca leaves that had been freshly prepared, freshly picked, and then they had to be dried in this round earth thing, and that took a long time because you have to dry it but not burn them, and they have to be moved all the time. And the entire place fills with this delicious smell of toasted coca leaves. And then they're put into this giant thing where they're beaten up and brought. The entire process from leaf to actually, a bowl of mambe that we could have takes about 2.5 hours. And through this, everybody's talking and people are commenting and they're doing rapé, and then finally the bowl arrives, and you just, you fill your cheeks with this thing that tastes delicious. It's like spirulina. It's freshly made. I can't even begin to, how good this is. And then because of the way it is, that's again the wisdom in this, is that it is slow released. It keeps all of the incredible amount of vitamin. There's more calcium than milk in coca leaf. There's more vitamin D than, it's insane how healthy it is. And you're keeping all of that. And also the way that you put them in your cheek, this means that the release of the cocaine, it's actually very, very slow. So you never go to those places Western people do, which is like, snorting coke up your nose, which is the equivalent of drinking pure ethyl alcohol instead of a beer. It's like, why would you have wine? Why would you drink pure alcohol? It's stupid. Just, and wine tastes good, and same difference. And this would take everybody to this place of quiet, relaxed attention, which is also the opposite of what you associate with cocaine. And then the issues of the day would begin to get discussed, and they would just go around very slowly. And it was incredible how I was astounded of how well I was listening. I didn't know this experience.
100% present.
I didn't know this experience of actually really being able to listen quietly with no anxiety, no desire to say anything back,
No judgment.
not just listening. And that's what they were doing. And what they're doing is they're building consensus. They're coming to the agreement as a community of what went on. And everybody takes a turn to speak, and everybody listens intently, and this goes on. And I was so, again,
we should go into the parliament and the Congress and the lower house.
Again, I had, the very powerful feeling that this was one of the most civilized things that I'd ever seen. Far from being, an odd practice of a faraway tribe that anyway, that was not part of civilization, whatever. This is what real civilization looks like, And
Amazing. So to conclude, if someone had a similar experience than you and want to dedicate their life to help those plants, what would you recommend them? To send a CV to you, to ICEers? Or
to just keep following the path. I mean, what can I say? I cannot, I didn't, many of the things that have happened to me found me.
Because you were ready to listen.
Because I was already in the right position. So, that's also what I would say, and, I left that out of the story, but, my collaboration and ICER started completely organically. They called for me, and then they called for me again, and then here I was. So, I cannot, I of course take credit for my efforts and for my career. But I also understand that that the most important things that have happened to me were not exactly my decisions. That doesn't mean that I'm free to not take any responsibility. I had to own everything. But the most important things that happened to me were not exactly decisions that I took.
Mm-hmm. So there is something about being open in receiving, like more maybe with your body, try to be less intellectual about things.
One person who I love dearly that died recently, who taught me a lot about this, she put it in terms of transparency. She said, you have, and this is a person that was very much in the spiritual understanding of things. She said, you have the messages and the learnings that come from the spiritual world. And then when they come through you, it's like a window. And then if the window is dirty, the light just doesn't get through the same, and the message gets twisted. So very often people will get valid insights from ayahuasca, and they get twisted by their egos and manipulated into something else. So the work is not, how do I understand what ayahuasca is saying,
clean the windows.
But how do I become transparent enough? How do I get out of the way?
Yeah.
So that you can really be guided.
Yeah. And how do you do that?
Instead of following the
How do you clean the windows?
Meditation,
practice of presence.
with dietas, with this, you need regularly to break from life and take the time where you can listen. You can listen to yourself, and you can listen to other things. That for me is the dietas. I do them every year.
Because what I think dirty the windows is your reactivity and your triggers.
Yeah, and your ego, everything, memories.
And so reactivity and triggers are rooted in childhood trauma, Gabor Mate would say.
Yeah.
So you need to do some work on that.
Yeah, but also your desires and your secret hopes and aspirations and your ambition. All of your how do you want to be seen and perceived by others, and how do blah 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 blah.
But this is personality or reaction to trauma.
Both.
How do you want to be seen?
Both. Yeah,
Both.
and then it depends. For some people, more trauma. For other people, compensation, overcompensation, undercompensation.
Yeah.
Some people want to hide for all the wrong reasons, and some people want to be seen for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah. But so can you invite people to join the Dieta Center? Is it open to the public?
I'm
private.
It's a small organization. They don't need more people. You're going to have to need. You're going to have to. Everybody's going to have to find their own path.
Yeah.
And that's half the fun.
Yeah. So,
But I would say is that, if you be careful with your car mechanic, and you're careful with the lawyer, and you're careful with your doctor, be very careful with your shaman and your traditional doctors. Look at them, ask questions. Are they young? Are they old? Do they look experienced? And most important, do they look like they care for you?
Yeah. Yeah. The problem is that, for car mechanic and lawyer and etc., you have Yelp or something, but there is no Yelp for shaman yet. But anyhow, if people are serious about wanting to do a dieta, do the research, start asking, and you'll find the right place for you.
Because again, it's the circumstance. Do you speak the language? Do you speak Spanish? Have you been to the jungle before? Can you be, are you afraid of bugs? All of these things will very much, change your experience. So there's not a one size fits all advice that can be given, other than from the place where you are, what does it look like to spend some time alone in the middle of the jungle? And then if that seems a bit iffy, then maybe you should go to more commercial, established centers that are near Iquitos, which is a number of them, and they're very well established. And if you say, no, I sleep outdoors all the time, whatever, then maybe you can just go and find somebody in a more remote community. But it depends on the person.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jerónimo. I think we have room for a third episode. Thank you very much for your time and your knowledge and your wisdom, and for respecting your promise.
Thank you, Giancarlo. Always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Coca sunarai sunarayenti. 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 Coca sunarai sunarayenti.